If you've spent any time online recently, you've probably run into the word trad. It's short for traditional, and it's part of a lifestyle trend on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. The Tradwife aesthetic is everywhere. Women who marry young, have children, bake bread from scratch, sew their own clothes, and proudly present themselves as throwbacks to a better past. A time, supposedly, when men worked hard and women stayed quiet at home, creating a cozy, harmonious household. It's painted as if this has always been the natural order of things, stretching back through centuries of human history. And in rejecting modern social changes, the Tradwife trend tries to make it seem noble, even radical, to turn back the clock and live like a 1950s housewife, or maybe in their imagination like a medieval peasant woman. But here's the problem. This traditional past doesn't really exist. If you could hop in a time machine and step into medieval Europe, you would not find a society of housebound women chained to kitchens while their husbands marched off to earn a living. The reality of women's lives in the Middle Ages was far more complex, far more demanding, and honestly, far less like the TikTok fantasy. Now, before you grab your pitchforks, this is not me saying that medieval women had it easy or better. They didn't. Life was harsh, brutal, and filled with hardship. What I'm saying is that the so-called traditional wife role, the image of a docile homemaker serving her breadwinner husband, wasn't really the historical tradition people think it was. It's a modern invention, often inspired more by 1950s advertising than by actual history. Let's start by comparing two very different worlds, the 1950s suburban home and the medieval village. You've probably seen the ads or parodies of that era. Husband kisses wife on the cheek, grabs his briefcase, and goes off to the office. Meanwhile, the wife stays behind to cook, clean, and raise the children. That ideal of domestic bliss, whether it was real or not, was mostly limited to industrialized societies in the mid-20th century, and even then, mostly to middle and upper-class families. Medieval Europe was nothing like that. Society revolved around household economies, not individual careers. The household was the unit of survival. Everyone, husband, wife, and children, worked together. The family farmed, crafted, traded, and produced as a team. One of the main reasons people wanted large families was because more children meant more helping hands in the field or the workshop. Picture a medieval serf. He's tied to the land, spending his life plowing, sowing, reaping, and desperately trying to survive. Was his wife sitting at home perfecting recipes for his supper? Absolutely not. She was right there with him, gathering, binding, repairing tools, sorting supplies, even selling surplus goods. And their children, once old enough to walk, joined in the work. Survival required every set of hands. This isn't just guesswork. We have plenty of evidence. For instance, the Luttrell Psalter, an illustrated manuscript from 14th century England, shows men and women harvesting side by side. Men reap while women bind sheaves and carry loads. The British Library even points out that these scenes were drawn deliberately to reflect reality, because during harvest, all labor was needed. The Domesday Book, compiled in the 11th century under William the Conqueror, also records women working across different occupations: brewers, bakers, dairymaids, and more. Women engaged in nearly all the same village industries as men, with very few exceptions, blacksmithing being one because of the sheer physical strength it required. And this wasn't unique to England. Across medieval Europe, women contributed to the economic survival of their households. They weren't tucked away in kitchens. They were vital participants in both agriculture and craft production. Now I can already hear the critics, but what about cities? What about outside of England? What about the upper classes? Good questions, and the answer is that the same pattern holds true. Let's look at medieval Paris. In 1268, a city official named Etienne Boileau compiled the Book of Trades, which listed the rules of Parisian guilds. Out of roughly 100 professions, several were led entirely by women, and in most others, women worked alongside men. For example, writing tablet makers explicitly included both male and female artisans. Textile and fashion trades, such as silk winding, embroidery, and spinning, were often dominated by women. Widows also commonly stepped into their husbands' businesses, running shops, breweries, or craft workshops. In fact, medieval law in many regions recognized the Parisian femme sole, a single or widowed woman who could own property, trade, and even sue in court independently. In Florence, Venice, and other Italian city-states, widows often took over banking and merchant ventures. One notable example is Donna Andrea Dinari of Trevi, who in the 15th century continued her late husband's cloth business and appeared in legal contracts as an independent merchant. Was this the norm for every woman? No. But the point is that medieval women were far from invisible. They were active in the economy, often running family businesses or even managing their own. And then there's religious life. Christianity shaped medieval society at every level, and monasteries and convents weren't just spiritual centers, they were economic engines. Nuns ran convents that owned land, collected rents, operated markets, and produced goods. Take Malling Abbey in England. Its nuns were granted the right to run a weekly market as early as the 12th century, essentially making the abbess the lord of a small market town. Convents also produced highly valued goods, embroidered textiles, manuscripts, even beer. Yes, some convents ran breweries where nuns brewed ale, sold it to pilgrims, and handled the accounts themselves. These institutions became hubs of female economic independence, entirely managed by women. So, let's step back. What do we see when we look at all this evidence? Medieval women baked bread, raised children, and kept house, yes, but they also harvested crops, made textiles, sold ale, ran businesses, managed convents, and kept entire households alive through their labor. They weren't passive homemakers, waiting for their husbands to return with wages. They were workers, managers, and contributors in nearly every aspect of medieval life. The Tradwife image of a woman bound to the home, serving the man who earns money outside, belongs more to the industrial and post-industrial world, not the medieval one. In fact, the household model of the Middle Ages was arguably more egalitarian in labor distribution because survival required cooperation. Husband and wife were partners in toil. Their work, though divided, was deeply interconnected. So, the next time you see a trad influencer churning butter in a prairie dress and claiming this is how women have always lived, remember, history tells a different story. The past wasn't a golden age of docile wives and dominant husbands. It was a struggle for survival, where women's labor was essential and visible. Medieval women weren't tradwives. They were workers, artisans, traders, farmers, nuns, and sometimes even business owners. Their lives were difficult, yes, but they were never confined to the narrow domestic roles that the tradwife fantasy wants to resurrect. So what do you think? Is the tradwife trend an innocent lifestyle choice, or is it based on a deep misunderstanding of history? And this has been Medieval Mindset. Be sure to like, subscribe, and stick around for more of my long-winded rants about medieval history.